doing a lightning talk? Anybody in here? Nobody? All right. I just wanted to get a general feel to see what was going on. The way that I'm going to start this off is the worst possible way, which is to do a demo. I hope that it works, like everybody who speaks does. What I'm going to be showing you guys is, okay, cool, demo. I'm going to be showing you a basic command line interface. So with this basic command line interface, you see the program that you're using, which is Python in this case, and you're using the file, which is demo.py. The other thing that a basic command line interface typically has nowadays is a help prompt, so that when you do pass a help flag, it gives you some kind of information about how to use the command line interface itself. In this case, it's showing you've got some options, name and password. If you get a little bit fancier later on with your command line scripts, what you're capable of doing is having it prompt you. So in this case, I type in my name, and then maybe you take in some sensitive information, so you don't want that to display. In this case, I'm going to purposefully get it wrong. You also want it to give you some feedback to let you know, hey, try again. Maybe you want to show a progress bar, but now you're just kind of going further into it. You really don't need this on a command line interface. I'm just kind of showing you what's possible, and then something amazing happens. And you know, and you've done something great, but you've all done it through a great command line interface, and anybody can do it. Is kind of the big idea. What my goal is with this session is to honestly get all of you guys to realize how trivial it is to make command line interfaces nowadays, so that it's going to be the obvious thing to do the next time you make a Python script. The other nice thing about it is if you work with people who aren't familiar with scripts or just afraid of the command line interface in general, you would be able to build these for them, give it to them, and they would be happy to use your scripts because they know they're so friendly. At this point, you're probably thinking, let me see here. You know, this guy wants me to build command line interfaces, I don't do that. So you're probably like, what? And the thing about that is they're very easy to add now. They're easy to maintain now. And I say now because I actually worked with command line interfaces maybe 4 years ago when I first started with Python. And to me, they were the biggest pain in the world. And they're also easy to work with, as you just saw. So once again, my name is Eloy. I do have one of those things on the end of my last name, and I use it to test online forums, so be careful. I work for a small company called Decision Health, which I'm not doing justice to right now because they gave me a shirt, and I'm not wearing it, but it's okay. What we do is we aggregate patient information, and then we display it in near real time in order to help doctors, nurses, friends, and family members. Our interfaces look something like this. And the idea is that right now when you go to the doctor and you go to a patient's room, you see all of these semi-archaic machines that aren't really archiving information, in case you guys didn't know that. And we're hoping to kind of, you know, give the patient's room kind of a facelift. It should look like a patient's room from 2014. And this is kind of what we have on top of the patient beds. They sit on 60-inch displays. They're very nice. People like them. And the fact that we're using HTML, JavaScript, CSS to build these interfaces means that doctors can access information about their patients on mobile devices and on their computers, at home, and that makes a whole lot of sense. It makes a whole lot of sense that they should be able to take care of the people whenever. It's located in a small place called Houston, and we're right at the heart of the medical center, so we're very lucky to be doing that there. Once again, I started at Decision Health January 1st of this year, so it's going to be, 10 months now. And I had never really worked with command line interfaces as much as I have here. We actually maintain several Python projects, and they're dependent on each other. And because we use all of these individual Python projects so often, it only made a lot of sense for us to build human interfaces to them so that we didn't go insane working with them. And that's kind of the way this whole thing spun up, and the reason I'm doing this talk now. When I first arrived there, January 1st, we started using a product called docopt. Docopt is very cool. It's clever in the sense that what you do is you use command line interface, you use document strings. And what it'll do is it'll parse your document string, and then that'll be the configuration. So what ends up happening is you're writing both the documentation and you're configuring it at the exact same time, which is kind of neat. And actually, Luke, sorry, I'm not trying to embarrass you. He's one of the first people that mentioned it to us during a Houston meetup. And we're grateful because we use it now, so thank you. And the person that started this started at April 2012. And once again, it uses docstring implementations. Not conventional, but still very clever. Later on, while I was working with the company around April, I was looking through my Twitter, because that's what you do at work, and I saw one of my favorite developers, Armin Notcher. He had made a product called Click, which actually competes directly with docopt. How do I know this? Because it says it in his docstrings. He actually wrote a whole paragraph on why not docopt. It's not that he's against docopt, it's just that it didn't meet the needs that he was looking for. So docopt's kind of whole goal is to be as minimal as possible, to just kind of give you a basic command line interface, and for you to be able to use documentation so that it's familiar for those who are familiar with documentation. Click's goal is to, what was his goal? His goal is to make the commands themselves click with each other. The idea would be that if you make a command and I make a command, they could become subcommands of each other. And if you're unfamiliar with subcommands, think of get. You have get, which is the command, and then you have pull, which is the subcommand, or push or clone, so on and so forth. And that's kind of his whole vision for Click. Great guy, not that I know him, but he makes great products. When I first started working with command line interfaces, I had to mess with sys.argv. How many of you have actually messed with sys.argv? You could either do it with a raise of hands or like groans, like, oh yeah, I remember working with that. And then there's also optparse, and you can kind of see what the interfaces look like. They're not friendly at all. They don't really turn you on. They don't make you want to work with them. If you spend 20 minutes making a script and then you have to spend 40 minutes to give it a command line interface, you're probably not going to. Later on, they also ended up making getopt, and then they also made argparse, which once again, all very disgusting languages. I mean, not languages, but syntaxes. If you look at this and you don't think it's a little like ugly, you may not be as human as you once were, and you may have been programming for too long. So this is ugly, but we use it because it works. So while I was exploring this stuff, I saw docopt, and then I got curious about it because of Click. I started looking through other syntaxes. I know that there's like Cliff, and there's a lot. One of the ones that actually piqued my interest was one called Begins. Begins is actually not that popular when you relate it to docopt and to Click, but it piqued my interest because of his whole goal. His whole goal was to almost have it be invisible. You should be able to almost import it and then just continue writing your functions, and a command line interface should kind of somewhat automatically appear. So very interesting goal. It led to some interesting holes, but overall the project, I mean, it's pretty awesome. This one gives you an idea. This one was started in 2011, so this is probably the oldest out of all of them, and you can tell that he's kind of been slowly working on it, but I feel like he's kind of hitting that hockey puck where more people are contributing to the project. My goal in this session, once again, is to show you guys how easy it is to do this stuff, but instead of just comparing these three specific command line interfaces, what I want to do is I want to compare them, but I want to test them against specific features that I'm looking for inside of a command line interface, things that might be important to you as well. Something that's important to me is how much configuration is required. Obviously, I don't want that much configuration. How many entry points? That means how many places do I have to update in order to make one change? Typecasting, can it do it for me? Configuration variables, can I have all of my defaults set inside of a file somewhere and then not have to manually type them in every single time? Same thing with environment variables. Can I just stick them in the environment and then it has the defaults there? Subcommands, which I somewhat mentioned with Git, and implementation, just the way that they actually added it to functions. Okay, so we're going to look at them. This order is somewhat arbitrary. We have begins, docopt, and Click. The way that I kind of want you to think of them is this one requires the least amount of configuration, while these two require some configuration, and you kind of check them out with each other. Doc amazingly, is actually the least robust out of all of them. I would have thought it was begins because, you know, if there's little configuration, it's probably less robust, but that wasn't the case here. Where begins is somewhat robust, I mean, yes, and then click is by far the most robust. And in the beginning, when I first started with this, I kind of fast forwarded here a little bit. I thought that docopt was the most intuitive, but it wasn't fair for me to say that when I first started this project, because I had been working with docopt for 4 months already. And obviously the thing that you're working with is obviously going to be the most intuitive. It's like you're experienced with it. But after working with all three of them, they are all very intuitive in their own way. The mental models to kind of understand each one, they're simple. You're not sitting there trying to figure it out. It's just the syntax that you have to reference every now and then. Okay, so this is a basic example of begins and the help screen. And this is the one that I was talking about that's somewhat invisible. Can you guys see that text? Yes? No? In the back? Yes? Good. Thank you guys back there. So you have on line 5, you have a definition. You have a function. It's run. You have a doc string that says say hello world. And then to actually give it a command line interface, you literally just type import begin, and then you give it a decorator of begin.start. That's it. You just gave your function a help, what is it? I don't want to say prompt, help interface, I guess you could say. So that's begins. Docopt, you can see it's a little bit more cumbersome. You've got some doc string at the top. Like I said, this is the implementation. The implementation itself is through doc strings. You pretty much write it out the way that you expect to see it. This gets parsed out, and then the way that you collect your options is on line 14. This is actually where, quote unquote, the magic happens. It's where it's reading the doc, and it's where it's configuring your command line interface. And then you'll also notice on line 17 and 18, for those of you who are familiar with just the basic Python file, you have the if name equals main magic happening. Now, I'm actually going to go back one slide. You'll notice that the if name equals main magic is not on this file, and that's not an accident. Begins.start is actually doing that work for you, so you don't have to worry about that anymore. To me, that's a little bit Ruby-ish. I'm not trying to offend Ruby. It's, what is it? Convention over configuration. But the big idea is that you don't need it. It's not necessary. It should be built right into the actual start decorator itself, where these guys are more explicit over implicit, and they keep the if name equals main magic. So this is technically more Pythonic. Okay, so begins, docopt, and this is click. Click, you can kind of see, is a middle ground. He uses decorators for his implementation instead of doc strings. Instead of .start, it's .command, and he keeps the if name equals main magic. So once again, very Pythonic. Begins. So this was just adding a help screen. This is passing an argument. Begins. All you do is you pass a parameter to your function the way you normally would. That's it. What it'll do is it'll actually take that value and then just bring it on in from the command line interface itself. In this case, because I didn't pass a default, it assumes that it's a flag, so it's not required. So if you forget to put it in, it's false. If you do pass the flag, it's true. In docopt, it's a little bit more work, but it's not confusing. I mean, it's somewhat obvious what you're doing. You're literally just writing a line that says, you'll see line 8. You're writing a short option, which is the V, the long option, which is the whole word, verbose, and then you can specify your default here. And then the way you pick up your verbose option is on line 15. It's all stuffed inside of a dictionary called options, in this case on line 15. And then you just retrieve it with the long name. You'll see here I'm retrieving it with dash verbose. Okay. And then we have click, which is even more configuration. And then I'm actually going to go back one slide again to show you guys something interesting. In this case, for Boolean values specifically for click, he prefers that you pass both a true / and then the false option. And then you pick the default that you want. If you don't pick a default, it goes to false. And then you have some help text as well. And the same thing, you pass the verbose parameter on line 5, and then you print it out on line 7, or use it however you want to. Now, earlier when I was showing you the different things to look at whenever you're evaluating your command line interfaces, I was talking about, sorry, I'm walking away from the mic, entry points. If you notice in this case, I know it's not a big deal, especially because it's such a small script, but in this case, you are adding the word verbose to both lines 4 and 5, 2 entry points. Once again, not annoying right now, but it will be when you start adding subcommands and you're talking about, you know, hundreds later. The other thing that I wanted to point out here was the help keyword here. It allows you to give you some help text. Click does it, docopt does it with the on line 8. You're allowed to add help text there. I didn't in my case, but you can add help text there. Begins, because his whole goal is to not really be present, there is no option to do that. So there's no help text for any of your arguments or options. So if you can live with that, it's cool, and it will work for you. Okay, so now I'm going to show you guys data type casting. If people are passing in options, options are typically perceived as either strings or Boolean values, depending if they're flags or just actual text. In this case, what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to cast the information into an integer. And if it's not an integer, it raises an exception. So for begins, you pass another decorator that says .convert. You name the variable. In this case, you see the lines 5 and 6. They both say port. They're associated with each other. I give myself a default of 8,000. But the idea is that when the value comes in, the value itself is an integer and not a string. And that's all that's required in order to typecast. And you'll see that I'm using the int class in order to, you know, to kind of coerce it into that value, into that data type. You can use int, you can use float, you can use bool, all the built-ins that come with Python. Once again, you can see how this code is very small. Oh, okay, and then he has a special one. That's called automatic, underscore automatic specifically. And the only reason he did underscore automatic is because he doesn't want to interfere with other people's possible function parameters. Now, if you go and name one of your options underscore automatic, I'm not really sure what happens. So don't do that. But this one's really nice because what this does is it takes care of all values. What it'll do is it'll try to intelligently figure out what the variable is based off of the default value. So if you have a default value that's a float, it's going to bring it as a float. All of this seems very trivial, but the fact that it took so long for something like this to exist is just amazing. Oh, and this goes back to the conversation. I just went ahead and hit him up on Twitter because that's what Twitter's good for. I asked him about being able to add help text, and he replied. He said, in Python 3, yes, using function annotation. In Python 2, no. And then, of course, he offered to fix it. So once again, showing you that the Python community is a very nice community. Data type casting. Oh, this is for docopt. Okay, so we did begins and we did, yeah, we just did begins, sorry. For docopt, all we're going to do is, oh, it goes off of your default value. So in this case, we did port, oh, and then we just set 8080. I'm sorry, okay, I understand. And I got semi-confused here. The reason that I actually don't see the typecasting here is because docopt doesn't actually have typecasting. Docopt will only do typecasting for both Boolean values and strings. That's it. So that's a shortcoming of docopt. And I just kind of wanted to show you, oh, if you look on line 18, you'll see, this is what the printout, I don't know if you guys can see that actually, but the point is when it prints out, the port ends up being of type string. That's the point. So it's going to be your job to sit there and convert it. And to some people, that's not a big deal, especially if your script is small. But to others, they feel that the command line interface should handle all of that for you and the values should be ready for you to work with. Click, I think, is very intuitive in this sense. All you do for this is it reads it off of your default value. It's the same as begins, only in this case, you don't have to specify automatic. It assumes automatic. So whatever your default value is, it'll push to that value. If you want to be even more explicit, you can pass a type keyword and literally just say type equals int, and then it'll coerce it to that. Okay, and then this is environment variables. This is just reading from your environment. For those of you who aren't familiar with environment variables, actually, How many people here are familiar with environment variables? Just kind of raise your hands. Okay, very few actually. Either that or you guys are tired. Environment variables are variables that you can actually stick into your Linux environment. These values are held in memory, and depending on your specific siloed out environment, you can pluck these variables out and use them as defaults inside of your command line interface. So if you're working with a team and everybody's got the same exact environment set up, they don't have to pass any extra options, like the defaults are inside of the environment itself. In this case, what you would do, and you can do this on your machine right now if you've got some kind of Linux-based system that you can't use. Windows guys, I'm sorry, I don't have that much experience in Windows. You would just do export begin underscore port, and then what it does is it kind of just looks at the begin value to know that it takes its value from there, and then port would be the actual default. You can kind of see an example of it on line 4 in the comment. And that's where your environment variable would come from. Now the default prefix, the environment prefix, can be whatever you want. In this case, I just typed in begin. Docopt doesn't have it. And then click, somewhat the same thing, only you're very explicit about it. In this case, you do, oh, I'm sorry guys, I actually messed up on that. You would actually just type in port, that's it. Environment port, oh no, never mind. That variable can be whatever you want. It can be click underscore port, that's where you store your variable, that's where it picks it up from. You can name it whatever you want, it doesn't matter. So once again, it gives you a whole lot of flexibility. And then last but not least is configuration variables. You name the file, the config file. In this case, I took it straight out of the help files that they provided or their documentation, and they have camelot.config. This file can either sit with the script itself, or it can sit in your home directory and it'll read it from there. And then it uses the basic INI type of formatting. In INI formatting, it has a section, and then it has your variables, and then it has a section. You can name your section. In this case, I named it Camelot, and then it'll read your values straight from that config file. If you don't specify a config section, it'll take the name of your function. So in this case, your section would be called run. And that's it. It just reads the files from here. Now, the nice thing about this is the way it all kind of, the hierarchy of it. First, it tries to read from the first it tries to read from the parameters, then it tries to read from the config file, and then last but not least, it reads from the command line. The command line always supersedes everything. And then docopt doesn't have any configuration variables, and neither does click. And actually, I do believe that is the end of my presentation. Oh no, it's not. I have one more part, sorry. Subcommands. Oh, I'm on time. Okay, good. Subcommands begins. You'll recognize on line 9 through 12, we have the basic run that we had earlier, which is what we first started with. If you want to declare a subcommand, you just use a different attribute on the begin instance, which is just called subcommand. And the big idea is that whenever you call your script space pool, in this case it takes the function name, it will run both the run function and the pool function. Both of them always get run. Whenever you're using subcommands, typically the first command or the main command is used as your constructor. And I've noticed that's kind of the convention that all of these systems are using. And then I don't know if you guys can see it on that screen, especially with the gray, but lines 14 and 16 kind of give you an example of what the output looks like. Docup is funny. Docup doesn't come out of the box with subcommands, but somebody asked about subcommands, so what they ended up doing was they said, yeah, we can do it, and then they rolled out all of this. And I think if I even click on the link, like, so they made it work. They said, you know, maybe we don't have subcommands, but we can do it. They ended up writing all of this, and this is just the constructor itself. What you have to do after that is you have to come out here to like in this case your get, and then each one of these is a subcommand. So you can see how having to write your own doc string kind of gets cumbersome. But each one of these ends up being the subcommand itself, and this is the actual command, the constructor that gets called every single time. So is it possible to do subcommands in docup? Yes. Do I recommend it? No. And then with click, You've got your constructor on line 5, which is your run command. And then what actually ends up happening here is you'll see on line 8 my decorator that says run.command. The function run actually inherited an attribute called command. So any other function that you stick run.command on will become a subcommand of run itself. So you can easily see how you can start to scale quite quickly because of it. Okay, and that's it. Any questions? I know that was kind of fast. Yes? Auto-completion. Of all the interfaces that I played with, I did not see any options for auto-completion. So I apologize for that. Say that again? Well, the input validation would be like the typecasting stuff. On top of that, which I don't have in the presentation, they have callbacks so that when an option is passed, it can trigger another function, or actually it can trigger anything, and then you can do any kind of validation you want inside of that, that callback. Anything else? Yes, sir. Oh.
Don't forget the entry points and setup. The entry points and setup.
Yes.
Don't forget about it.
The entry points? What do you, I'm sorry.
When you do a package,
yes.
you can do the entry points, point to...
Oh, yes, 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 yes. The ones that do come, actually all of these are capable of doing entry points, is my understanding. Once again, because the talk has to be so short, all of these do accept entry points. All that does mean is that inside of your setup.py file, whenever people install your script, you can make your short scripts be a part of the interface itself. And actually that does help a lot with what you were asking earlier, and that's auto-completion. If you built a command that said, I don't know, destroy database, you can literally start typing DES and it'll finish the command for you. And that's right in your environment once again because of entry points. Thank you so much. And all of them do handle it. The other thing I'd like to mention last but not least is that click is the only one that is both Python 2 and Python 3 compatible. And what makes it Python 2 and Python 3 compatible, and I'm not using it here on my stuff, let me see if I used it anywhere else, I used it here, is this click echo method. And all that means is that it's handling both the Python 2 and Python 3 version of print. That's all that it's doing for you. So that you can be happy knowing that, or sleep comfortably knowing that whenever you guys are forced to push to Python 3, that your command line interfaces will be ready. All right. Okay. I'm sorry, guy. I'll come back to you. Thank you, everybody.